Hi all, welcome to the first in our most recent series of videos for the National 4-5 course, and this is looking at development from Unit 2. Now, the development topic follows on very neatly from the population topic, and it covers a lot of the same kinds of areas, and it looks at a lot of the same kind of use of statistics to tell us how well developed or not a different nation is. Now, in terms of a kind of general idea of how this topic is structured, it's fairly brief, it's fairly to the point. So we look at how we measure development, we look at some of the reasons for the differences in development between different nations, and this will wrap up with a case study that we'll come to fairly shortly. Now, to start us off, today in this video, we're going to look at some of the ways that we measure development. Now, first, before we get there, I suppose it's important to try and define what actually is development. Now, this as a concept is really actually hard to explain and to put into words, or to put into certainly a simple kind of couple of sentences anyway. So I've went for the kind of cop-out, and I've lifted a couple of definitions from the dictionary. So first, develop, verb, developed, developing, to make or become larger or more advanced. Now, for us, the kind of key part of that is the becoming more advanced. It's not necessarily that the bigger a country or the bigger a society is, it means that it's more developed. It's about how advanced it is. If we look at it in terms of in a country, so a developing country, noun, a poor agricultural country that is developing better economic and social conditions. Now, that's a lot more geographical. It's something that we can really get our teeth into more, and it's something that we can start to take apart and think, right, okay, so if we are saying that a developing nation is a poor agricultural one that's trying to improve or to develop its economic and social conditions, what are those economic and social conditions? How do we measure them? Why are they the way they are? And what can be done to improve them? So to bring us to how we actually go about measuring development. So we use bunches of different indicators. Now, I'm not going to cover every indicator that you can possibly use, but we'll look at some of them. So first, we have economic indicators. So a lot of things to do with money. So the first two we have are very, very similar. So we've got GDP and GNP per capita. Now, GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product, and GNP stands for Gross National Product. Now, these things are very, very similar. The gross domestic product is everything that a country makes within one calendar year in terms of all the goods and services that it makes, and then it's assigned a value in its market value in dollars. The per capita means we take that value and we divide it by the population of that country. And the idea is that it's meant to give us this idea of roughly how wealthy is everybody who lives in a given nation. Now, GNP, more or less the same idea, except it also includes money that a country would earn for services that it renders overseas. Now, energy use per capita should seem fairly straightforward. It is just simply the idea of how much energy does each person in a country use on a day-by-day or occasionally on a yearly basis. It's more common to see it on a day-by-day basis. And again, we would assume that the more energy your population, each individual is utilising, the more developed your country is. We've also got percentage employed in agriculture. Now, this comes all the way back to the definition that we had at the start. So if we were saying a developing nation is one that's primarily concerned with agriculture, this obviously is extremely relevant. So we look at the percentage of people that are employed with agriculture, and we can even do direct comparisons with how agriculture functions in developing nations to how it functions in developed nations. In developed nations, agriculture is ceased to be a labour-intensive process. We've got a huge amount of machinery and capital involved. So, machinery, literally, if you think about any given field, if you stick a modern farmer in that, he's going to take a tractor, a combine harvester, or whatever to harvest the crop that he's grown, and that will then go on to be sold. It takes 1, 2, maybe 3 people. If you look at a more traditional farming practice, you could be talking whole families or village groups to actually harvest a field, to harvest a crop from a field. So the more people you need to be involved in, simply put, acquiring a food source, we would judge that your nation or your country is less developed. Now, we've also got social indicators. Now, a lot of these you should recognise from the population topic. So we're talking about life expectancy, very straightforward. What is the age that the average person dies? Infant mortality. What proportion of infants, so under 1, die per 1,000 live births in any given calendar year? Number of people per doctor. Again, if you're in a developed nation, we would expect that value to be much lower if you're than somebody who's in a developing nation, where you don't have as many people going through higher education, thus you don't have as many people becoming doctors. And last, I say last, but the last I have here, daily calorific intake. So the amount of calories the average person in your nation gets on an average day. And again, the higher that value is, the more wealthy, the more spare we would assume that your country has to go around. Now, having mentioned all of these, there is some really important caveats to think about. There are issues with these indicators. There are problems with trying to use them. I like to think as you guys are watching this that you're thinking to yourself, you can't define a country by any one of these indicators. And that, I don't actually have that on the slide, but that is one of the big issues, is that you cannot and should not try to label a country, its entire level of development, with one individual indicator. But to think about some of the others, economic indicators, they don't tell us about how well money is spread throughout a nation. I mean, there are numerous countries in the world who have got a relatively reasonable looking GDP per capita. But when you actually drill into the data and you look at it in a little bit more detail, you've got a small number of exceedingly wealthy people who are sat on top of a population that is maybe not living in abject poverty, but certainly nowhere near the level of wealth that the GDP implies. It also doesn't imply, it's like the old saying, money can't buy you happiness. Just because you're wealthy doesn't mean your quality of life is necessarily high. It may well be coincidentally that the two are together, but it is not a 1 + 1 = 2 kind of equation. GDP also, unless we do some fancy maths with it, it doesn't account for cost of living. You could be living in a country with what looks like an extremely low GDP, but cost of living there is also much, much lower. So your $1, your £1 goes further than it would in a country whose GDP isn't possibly a lot higher, but the cost of living is equally higher. Now, social indicators, funny enough, inequality is also not shown. If you live in a poorer country and you are extremely wealthy, things like your life expectancy are probably quite high. But if you live in that same country but you happen to be very poor, that same indicator could be very, very low. You then take out what the figure you get for your overall life expectancy, and it doesn't show you either case properly. Social indicators and economic indicators, it comes back to what I was saying earlier. Neither of these individual indicators, or none of these individual indicators, give you the big picture. They don't give you the full idea of what's happening in any given country. Now, there is one last thing with these indicators that is one of the biggest single issues that we have with them, and it is the fact that they are averages. More or less all of the information that we've discussed you gather as an average. You take a series of data from your populace, you bring it all together and you divide it by either for, if it's infant mortality, it's per 1,000 births. If it's life expectancy, it's the average age people die across your population. They are all averages. Averages are very, very good at one thing in particular. Hiding the people at the very, very top, hiding the people at the very, very bottom. Comes back to this inequality that we were talking about earlier. The averages that all of these indicators, or most of these indicators, hide a lot of that. And that is a big, big problem with them. Now, next, we've got another set of indicators. and we call these combined indicators. Now, we really think about two combined indicators in the National 5 course, and these are the PQLI and the HDI, or Physical Quality of Life Index and the Human Development Index. Now, these are two different scoring systems that utilise a variety of different social and economic indicators to give us an idea of how developed a country is. Now, these are better than the individual development indicators that we've spoken about because they cover a range of areas. So, for instance, the Physical Quality of Life Index looks at life expectancy, infant mortality, and the adult literacy rate. So it looks at a combination of factors that would be influenced by healthcare, food, diet, and things that would be influenced by provision of education. It puts them both together, or puts all of them together, and it gives you a score between 0 and 100, and if you score above 77, it's considered to be good. The Human Development Index combines a few more indicators. It combines life expectancy, adult literacy rate, GNP per capita, average cost of living, school enrolment rates, and it gives a score from 0 to 1. And in this case, any value above 0.8 is considered to be developed. Now, I'm going to wrap this up here. The last point I want to make before I finish this video is it's really, really important to remember that development is a very tricky thing to identify. It's a very tricky thing to define, and it's a very tricky thing to try and nail down how developed or not a country is on the basis of a few snippets of statistical data. We need to remember that development is something that can be judged in a variety of different ways, and depending on how you are looking at it, some countries will score better or worse than others. That wraps up this video, guys. It's been an introduction to development and some of the development indicators that we use. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.